now we're going to get into it. The dreaded middle. So as I was thinking about this topic, I was thinking about, how do you approach that conversation? So there's the writing part, right? Writing through the middle of the book, getting to the middle, getting past the middle. There's the motivation part as writers, that part where we get stuck at some point, and sometimes that can happen in the middle, and sometimes it can happen at other places. There's revising the middle versus actually writing and pushing through the middle the first time. And then there's the middle in relation to the beginning, and there's the middle in relation to the end, right? Talk amongst yourselves. No, I'm just kidding. So to start, we had close to 300 writers RSVP for this conversation. And I know that we will have a lot of people who tune in both on YouTube and then also later. And that tells me that obviously something resonated with folks, the idea of the dreaded middle. So I wanted to give each of you just a minute to tell us, what does that mean to you? When you hear that phrase as a writer, I think it either struck fear in or curiosity in the hearts of many when they saw the topic, and so they signed up. But what do you think when you hear dreaded middle? And ire'ne, I'm staring at your face, so I'm going to start with you.
Well, it's interesting because actually I've been thinking about this all day, and what struck me wasn't so much how you approach that dreaded middle as what does dreaded middle imply about what our attitude is toward our writing. And that's what I got stuck on. And I thought about when people talk about, trudging through the middle, or they're soldiering on, or they're, in some way suffering. And I thought, that sounds horrible. Like, that's not what I signed up. I didn't sign up for this as a writer. I didn't sign up to suffer. I signed up to write, to enjoy it, to learn from it. To tell these stories that I couldn't not tell. I signed up for the energy of it and the vision of it and the imagining of it. I didn't sign up for drudge work. And so I think that's where perhaps a lot of us get stuck, because, well, kind of going on a tangent, but this is one of the problems with our educational system when it comes to reading and writing. We're taught to read books in this way that is very painful and excruciating, to read these books we're not interested in, and then to try to take them apart and for symbols and things like that. Instead of reading because we enjoy, or reading because we follow one writer to another writer to another writer, and our interest and our love for literature is ignited that way. Instead, everything's compulsory education. You have to do this, you have to do that. And so our joy in writing is also sucked out that way. That's taken out of us with these essays that are these 5-paragraph structures that are very rigid and very solid about what we're supposed to do. And we get away from the pleasure that first drew us to writing. And so I was thinking of that today, that we think of these sections of writing as being difficult, or as being work that is horrible. And we try to think of ways to kind of trick ourselves out of it. And I just keep going back to, the problem is thinking that it's going to be hard, is thinking that there has to be a thing that doesn't feel good. Why not enjoy all of it? Enjoy the beginning, enjoy the end, enjoy the middle, enjoy the confusion of it, enjoy the research, enjoy the not knowing, enjoy all of it. And that gives you more energy to approach that work than this sort of, hard on yourself, disciplinarian kind of like, I have to do this. This is the only way I'm going to finish the story. And so I think a lot of it is about what kind of attitude are we going to bring, to the middle.
Yeah. Thank you so much for saying that. Charlotte, what about you? Because I think that is a wonderful way to start this conversation, is that should we really just be reframing that in the first place, and not thinking of it as the dreaded middle, and not approaching a project as if there's going to be this part where, exactly what you just said in a much more eloquent way than I could even say it if I try to repeat you. But still, it is sort of that there is something about the middle of a project that that is different, it seems, for writers, for many writers, than the rest of the project, if that makes sense. And Charlotte, now I'm looking at your face and I'm just wondering, when you hear dreaded middle, what does that mean to you?
7 billion things, but I only go through 2.
Thank you.
I just so appreciate what ire'ne said, like that reframe of befriending the material is really important. But I think one of the reasons that there's, well, 2 reasons that there is dread, in Charlotte Gullick's opinion. One is many of us have never written a really long project before. And so it's almost an issue of like, can I really do this? It's a sense of wonderment, but also doubt. Like writing a book length project is really hard. And there's so much doubt in it that I think when we get to the middle, we're kind of like, well, I still don't really know what I'm doing. So should I keep going? And I think if we can embrace the idea of curiosity and the adventure, even though it's not necessarily easy, it doesn't have to be a life of suffering, a project of suffering. And I have found that in my own work, often what happens in the middle is where I do my, I'm going to be really woo-woo right now. That's where I change. Like it's a crucible of I'm going to see my characters differently. I'm going to see myself differently. I'm going to imagine who I am as a writer differently. And so change is hard. So that I think part of that dread might be that, you know, we're going to enter into murky waters and we don't know how we're going to come out of it. But it's a lot of it's about faith and process and showing up. That's only 2 of the billion things, I think.
All right. Well, if we have time, we're going to come back to you for the other, you know, almost billion. But for now, Donna, what about you? What do you hear when you hear dreaded middle?
So I was thinking about it today, and actually when you first said dreaded middle to us, for some reason, my mind made this association with the old maps, you know, and beyond a certain area, it was like, here be dragons. And I kept thinking about that and thinking about that, like, why would I make that association? And in memoir, we really are interested in why we make these associations, right? So one of the things is, you know, it's uncharted and it's the longest part, right? It's like the difference between running, and I'm mixing all my metaphors here, but it's the difference between running a sprint and running a marathon, right? The beginning and the end, we put a lot of work into those, but those are more like sprints. The middle requires a lot of showing up every day for the process, what Charlotte was saying. But, you know, I liked what ire'ne said about reframing, because it's the dreaded middle is where the story is. You know, it's where the story is. It's not, the story isn't really so much the beginning or the end. It's right there in the middle. And so here be dragons, right? This is the place. Yes, you could get lost. You could get stuck in a quagmire, but that is the adventure, right? This is where you get to fight the dragons. How fun. How awful to trudge through the dreaded middle every day without encountering a dragon or 2. I mean, it's the intellectual challenge, right, of doing this stuff that interests, I think, a lot of us. For me, it's like it's in the middle that I began to really puzzle the story out and kind of began to actually design and create a new puzzle, if you will. Can I bring in any other images here? We've got dragons and maps and puzzles. Oh my, you know. But I love that idea of reframing, and I love that idea of showing up for the process, because sometimes it gets tough. Mm-hmm. I remember in writing my first book, I say that because I am writing a second book, but I was talking to Stephen Harrigan, and I'm like, oh my God, it goes on and on and on. It was the dreaded middle. I'm like, when is it going to get easier? Because it was hard, because I was having to work 12 and 18-hour days to make that deadline. And he said, you know what? You will push and push and push that rock. Thank God for the Greek myths. And then you'll come up to a certain point, and that rock will start to roll over the bottom, roll over the other side toward the end. That's the relationship. And I thought, you don't know how hard this is for me. I really am suffering. And, but he was right. You know, I pushed and pushed and pushed. I showed up every day. I wrecked my back. I fought those dragons. I had some fun. I learned some stuff. I learned things only I will know. And then that rock started rolling down the other side. It really happened that way.
So we're going to drop the word dreaded. And we're just going to talk about the middle. Okay. Dreaded or not, joy or not, we're going to talk about the middle. So I guess the question I would ask is, and I love what each of you has also said about sort of the idea that it's also just that, you know, it's daunting writing that big book. And so the middle, of course, if you haven't done it before, especially, becomes even that more unknown. And it's about confidence as well, right? But let's talk about, just as you know, three people who teach craft, what is the work of the middle? What is the middle supposed to do? And I think Donna just alluded to, you know, from her perspective, of course, it's where the story is happening, right? But are there certain things when you think about the middle of the story, what is its role? What is its job? What is it supposed to be doing for the larger piece? Charlotte, I'm going to start with you.
I have a trillion ideas. No. What does the middle do? I mean, in fiction, I think it is actually where your characters become different people. And so they have to be faced with challenges that allow them to grow. I think it's it's through adversity our character is made. And I like that's kind of a life thing, but that's very true in fiction. And that's why I think action is really important. That's when, you know, your character has a little bit of information, they have a goal, and then they need to go try to obtain that goal and run into barriers. And so it's the obstacle course that allows them to become the better, stronger person that they want to be, or the more, I guess, here's great Charlotte talk, the worser person they might be. But it's really the opportunity for them to grow. That's what I think a middle in fiction is.
Mm-hmm. ire'ne, what about you in terms of, you write a lot of different sort of forms, right? But what would you say the middle is for you? Like, what is the job the middle is doing in the work that you're doing?
Well, first off, I wanted to say, I really liked what Charlotte said about the middle being the place that transforms a writer. Mm-hmm. You know, we hear all of this about how, you know, bored writer, bored reader. You know, your emotions and your energy as a writer transfer over to the reader. And, you know, you think about all these books that have transformed your life. You know, these books that just absolutely, you know, blew your understanding of yourself wide open, or that changed the way you saw the world, or that made you, you know, believe in something that you didn't before. And it's true, I think, that the work that doesn't transform the writer is not going to have potential to transform the reader. So that's definitely an energy that wants to be there, that needs to be there in order for that to happen. But I think, and I like this also, this place of shaping, because when you think of it, your beginning of any project, no matter what it is, it lays out the world. It lays out the situation. It tells the reader where we are, what we're looking at, all of that. The ending, you know, of course, ties it all up. I tend to usually write the beginning and then the ending and then the middle. And the reason I do that is because with the beginning, I've got my world set up. I know who the characters are. I know the lay of the land. I've given enough to be able to start. I often get the ending because there's a certain place I want to reach. And the reason I like writing the ending is because then I know that the work and the challenge of the middle is to earn that ending. To say, this is what is going to have to happen and what's going to have to happen. And I think that for me constantly invokes a sense of curiosity and a sense of exploration of, okay, how am I going to get these characters or the story or the situation or this narrative from one place to another? I have the beginning, I have the end. What is all of this work of the middle? And then one other thing I wanted to say that I was thinking about too, when we're talking about dread and difficult and what's easy, several years ago, I remember I was at a reading and there was a young man who stood up and he said, I'm writing this novel that I love. I love the story. I've been wanting to do this forever, but it is so hard to write. What do I do so that it's not so hard? And I said, I have absolutely no idea why you're asking me this question, because I believe when I come to the page, my challenge is to write the most difficult possible thing I can write. So the harder it is for me to write, the more I know that I am where I need to be, that I know what I'm needing to write. If it gets too easy, then I start to worry that I'm not doing that work. I'm not putting in the heat. I'm not bringing these characters to this place, and I'm not earning my future ending.
Yeah, and I think in some ways we're circling back to where we started with the idea of dread, and the dread being more about the way we as writers approach something versus how hard that makes the actual writing and the work itself. Because, you know, it doesn't, just because it's hard work doesn't mean it has to be dreaded, I guess is another way to say it. Donna, for you, what I want to ask is, I'm gonna quote your words back to you, because I was reading your class description today, and I know you've talked about this before in presentations that I've seen you do, because sometimes what we think of when we think of the middle is we think of 3-act structure, and we think of the middle being, you know, act 2. And in your class description, you say the 3-act structure, although useful to Aristotle and much of the Western canon, is not the only or even the best way to tell a story. And it just made me think that you have a slightly different relationship with the middle with that mindset. And I would love to just hear what you think of the middle's job being in memoir, and a little bit more about that idea about the 3-act structure and not using the 3-act structure.
Okay. Well, I wish I hadn't said that now. No, I think what you do in the middle really depends on and really determines what kind of structure you're going to have, right? I mean, and I think a lot of us write our way into structure. You know, it's but for me in the middle, I think about circling. It's in the middle where I begin to circle around certain narrative threads, certain themes keep rising to the fore, like they're rising out of the, you know, the depths of the water, and they're looking at me again. And this happens whether I'm writing in a sort of using a kind of spiraling collage structure, or whether you're even when you're using a chronological structure. I think it's really important when you're using a chronological structure to be able to let the mind of the writer circle around some of the whys. You know, these things have happened. Why am I remembering it, right? I know I'm not making much sense here. I'm doing my best.
Don't be silly.
So, you know, I think it's that the middle is where we began to examine the themes of our stories, and the why question. It can't be we're writing it because it happened, right? A lot of stuff happens. It needs to not all find its way in the story. I was thinking about laying out the narrative threads and letting those threads, you sort of pick them up and they drop, and you pick them up again. It's like you keep encountering something in the writing, right? And eventually those things that you encounter begin to shift your perspective, you know, begin to shift your narrative perspective, and you learn something new. It really, I was really interested to hear Charlotte say it's where the character changes, because memoir obviously has characters too. The narrator is a character, the narrator then and the narrator now. And I think it's in the middle, especially sort of at the apex before that rock begins rolling down the other side, where we have those moments, those kind of, if it's not an aha moment, maybe it's not an epiphany, it's often just a shift where we begin to see the story and our role in the story and what it means. It means something different now. We begin to see that a little differently.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So let's talk about preparing for the middle. And ire'ne, I love what you just said, where you, and people in the chat box are sort of commenting on it too, the idea of writing the beginning, writing the ending, and then writing the middle. and writing that middle so that it earns the ending that it's reaching towards. And so I would take, what I'd like to do then is ask each of you, and if you want to elaborate on that process, ire'ne, but how do you prepare for that middle? Meaning, do you outline, do you have an idea of, are you doing pre-writing to get yourself ready for the middle in the different, genres that you're each writing in and the different ways that you write? Besides sort of preparing yourself for it by writing the ending, are there other things that you're doing, ire'ne, to prepare for that middle?
Yes and no. So everyone who knows me knows that I hate outlines, and I really dislike knowing what's going to happen. I want to be surprised when I sit down. So I kind of tend, and I understand that for a lot of people, this is going to sound like a really laborious process, but I enjoy fragments of things. So if something comes to me, an image, a scene, some dialogue, a memory, whatever it is, I will write it down. And I think at this point now, I think I have faith that those pieces are going to find their way in if they're needed, that I'll pull on them when I need them. And I think maybe, that's part of the challenge of the middle, is that, we understand, okay, we're looking at a 250 page novel, and we're looking at this middle section that's 175 pages. And we focus on the bulk of it, but really it's all pieces. I mean, whether we write chronologically or not, whether we do outlines or not, we're all writing pieces. As Donna was saying, you think about when you talk to a best friend and you're telling them about the story of your childhood. You don't tell them, well, I was born in so-and-so place at this hospital, but you start somewhere, and over many conversations, you end up telling the entire story. And so you kind of, I think one of the best ways to approach a middle, whether it's an essay or a novel, is to think of that it's pieces that are going to end up being drawn together. And so we might have a certain trajectory of what we want to do, but to just be open to bringing in those fragments. And if we write them down, we write them down. That just makes it easier to copy and paste from somewhere else and put them together.
Can I ask you about your process for writing them down? Meaning, do you keep a journal where you're keeping each fragment when it comes to you? Are you writing them on scraps of paper that are near you? What's your process for collecting those thoughts?
Probably for about 22 years now, I've carried around a composition notebook that just has everything. So it's got my grocery list, it's got my daily journal, it's got my list of stuff to do, it has my budget for the month, and it has my little writing pieces. So that way I always know where these things are. It would be absolutely impossible to find things on spare scraps. I also, though, have horrible handwriting. So anything that I know that I'm going to use for writing, I end up typing up as soon as possible. And I love the fact now that with these smartphones, you can just dictate into it. You can just copy and paste from that and put it on a Word doc, and you're good to go. Because yes, my handwriting is awful, and I have no idea what I'm writing, half the time. So I do tend to keep a lot of things in Word docs. It was interesting, this last poetry collection that I wrote, it had a lot of new poems, but I also went through what was left over from about 20 years of poetry fragments. And everything that still sparked my interest, every line that I still really loved, I ended up bringing into the new book. And it actually then let me release all of these fragments I had been carrying around for years and years and years. Yes, we might not use it for this project. It might be for something else. But I love this idea of capturing those little pieces. I think I've talked about this in a workshop lecture that I did with y'all, but that it's a way of saying yes to the universe for gifting you with a little bit of inspiration or of an image or something. It'll be used somewhere. You just have to trust it'll come when you need it.
Can I say something, Becca?
Yes.
Well, I'm just really inspired by what ire'ne is saying, because I'm always talking to students about trusting the subconscious, that the subconscious knows, right? The subconscious knows what's going on. I mean, it knows far more about the story than you could ever get into any outline. And one of the things I love about trusting the subconscious is it will surprise you. It's back to that surprise, right? No surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. The subconscious will surprise you. These weird little things will come up, these weird little images, and you'll think, well, how does that connect with going to see my grandmother or whatever? But trust yourself, it does. And if you, I like what ire'ne is saying about writing little fragments. I have, in the project I'm working on now, I have some things, a couple of, I guess 4 scenes I know I need to write, but the rest of it, I am really trying to trust that process a little more. It's a lot slower. For my first book, I had an outline, and you know what? That book had some wonderful things, but it kind of read like that. There's kind of a programmatic thing that happens, right? And I'm really trying to trust the process a lot more, and it makes the middle, maybe it's like wandering in the wilderness, to use a biblical reference. You know, you wander there maybe a little bit longer, but I think what you come up with is something far more organic and far deeper. Thanks for letting me come in.
Of course. So you're not doing an outline for the second book, Donna?
No, and it's taken a long time, but part of that is because I don't really want to talk to people I need to talk to. Those conversations are really hard.
Yeah. People
who've lost people, you know, dirty cops, stuff like that. I don't really want to talk to those people, but I, you know, but there are scenes that I have in my mind. I know there are these these things that happen that have to be in the book, right? And I'm just keeping them in my mind. And, you know, one of the things that happens in the middle is you just think, oh my God, I can't do this one more day, right? And so I had to write something recently, and it involved looking very closely at a police report of a murder of a friend of mine. And I kind of was hoping to just scan, you know, kind of glance at it and get what I needed, but it was barely there. I literally had to put a light on it and then use a magnifying glass. So I had to spend a lot of time in that text, you know? And what was I going to say? I can't remember where I was going with that.
Well, I think that, you know, you were talking about putting off, you know, the writing.
Oh, right. Thank you.
Deal with things that are uncomfortable as well.
Thank
right?
you. Thank you. So what I did is I just thought, okay, I don't want to do this. How am I going to interest myself? How am I going to draw myself in? And I started so what I did was, didn't start with anything very gritty. I started with a very poetic, very lyrical description of a sea of fading letters and these planks of blacked out text in the middle, right? That may not stay. It may be a little over the top, but that's how I brought myself into it. Sometimes I use scenes. I write a scene a very dramatic scene in a very funny way. I say at least start it that way to kind of get me going, and then, you know, gradually I will veer toward the course I need to veer. But sometimes you just have to play with it a little bit, and you learn a lot. If you write a dramatic scene funny, you'll see the dark humor in it, you know?
Oh, I love that idea, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That's great. Charlotte, how do you prepare for the middle?
I just want to say that I'm at my friend's house and now there's a truck and machinery happening. Can you hear any of that?
Not right now.
Okay, good. Great. Okay, how do I prepare for the middle? Well, I think I'm going to repeat myself and just say, I know that the middle is where I'm going to commit to the project. And I am not an outliner. I'm very much someone who probably writes in scenes, and other people might call those fragments. And then I kind of trust the intuition to put them together. I do have a novel that I drafted last summer, and it has 40,000 words. So it's about, you know, in the middle. And what I need to know about it is I need to, 1, commit to the project. And 2, I need to walk my talk and say, what is it about this work that needs to surprise me, that's interesting to me? What am I avoiding in this middle? So what I tend to do is a lot of writing about the writing. I don't necessarily go in there and say, I'm going to do the scene or revise the scene. I was like, well, what does the scene need? So I'm someone that does a lot of writing about the writing, as I said, but I also use letters a lot when I'm stuck. So I'll write the project. Dear novel, what I'd like you to know is, and then I'll write for 10 minutes and I'm like, you're really evading me, or, you know, you need to surprise me, or, and then after 10 minutes, I have the project write me. Dear Charlotte, what I want you to know is you're avoiding me. And I do this a lot in classes. It's really fun, I think, because you can recognize that you have different identities as a writer in relationship to the project. And
I love
usually,
that.
there are so many times people, I mean, not to be crass, but I just remember one student whose novel wrote them back and just said, do me, like, get it done. Like, quit avoiding me. So I am someone, when I am stuck, particularly at the middle, I use a lot of, I call them jostling exercises to get myself to think about the project in new ways.
Do you have any others you can share with us? I think these are probably really helpful for folks.
One of the things I like to do is after, well, I would just want to say that ire'ne, the thing, like, I knew what the ending is on my novel, One Man Reservation. It was going to be a young woman on a horse with a rifle in the middle of the night. It's a modern day Western, but she started out as a almost finished with her PhD on an academic campus. So how did she get from campus to horse? That's where the middle, like that transition. So I really appreciated that. But so this next exercise, if I was doing that, I would imagine the end of the book, and then I would think about that character 20 years from the moment from when the book ended, and have them write a letter back to that younger self, like who they were at the beginning of the novel or who they were at the end, or have a character on their deathbed think back to those events that shaped who they were in their lives. So I do a lot of circling, I think, to get to know the work better.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to tell a quick story that I'm stealing from Jeremy Kratz, who is a wonderful writer who does our Texas Writes Workshop as well. And he said when he gets stuck somewhere, maybe he's trying to figure out a character's motivation, he's trying to figure out what the character would do next, but he doesn't know. He walks around his house and he pretends that he's being interviewed by Terry Gross on Fresh Air. And then he has Terry Gross ask him questions like, Jeremy, I mean, first of all, you're obviously a brilliant writer, but that character, Jim, like, what is his deal? And then Jeremy will have to figure out how to answer Terry Gross. And that's how he gets past it. You guys can steal that.
I saw a really interesting question in the chat. And so I was thinking about, I'm caught by it, from Larissa, where she's asking about what happens when the middle gets complicated or strays away from the ending that you've already written, if you've written the ending first. And I think one of the things is that we kind of get stuck in this idea that we have, this brilliant story that we're just going to sit down and all of it's just going to flow out of us. I guess some people say I write a lot, but what happens is that between the actual writing time, revising time, thinking time, and letting a project sit time, that means that sometimes a single story can take years. I just had a story published a couple months ago that I worked on and off, on it for 15 years before it saw publication. This novel that I'm working on, I'm about 15 years of thinking and writing and revising into it. And I think it's just we have these expectations about how much time we're going to need to do something. And so if we think that we're just going to sit down and we're just going to bust out the entire middle of a novel in a week or a month or a summer or a year, that's most likely not going to be the case. And also, if we look at a novel or a story, whatever it is that we're writing, not as a thing that is inevitable. We have these books that we love, and when we read them, it seemed as if they were inevitable, that the story would be formed the way it was. But we know that that's not true. at every point in time when the writer was working on it, it was in flux. Even after the writer wrote the end, the editor still came along and changed things. And so you have, it continues to be in flux. And so I guess what I'm trying to say in response to Larissa is that if it changes, it changes. If you write a middle and it changes your beginning, it changes it. If it changes your beginning, that changes too. If you find out that the reason, like I did, one of my stories wasn't working until I figured out the main character needed to be 16 years old and not 6. You know, that completely changed the entire story. And I think, I mean, that's one of the beautiful surprises of writing, when you realize everything is in flux. It all might change. You know, next week you might need to put it in a, you know, a different tense. It might need to be, there might need to be a different speaker. Somebody else might need to just jump out of the entire book completely. Yes, you're going to have to rewrite all of it and read it all over again. But that's one of the amazing things.
Well, and there are a lot of people in the chat who are responding to that and thanking you for talking about the amount of time that, that not that it takes, but that you give it, you know, that it deserves, that it needs. And I also love that you address that question, because you're sort of freeing us from thinking that because you've written that ending and you know you're going to write the middle that deserves that ending, it doesn't mean that ending can't change too, right? Yeah, I'm glad that you circled back to that. So so let's talk about when you're talking to students about that moment in the book. And for a lot of folks, or in the project, a lot of folks, that is the middle, where they feel stuck, or where they feel, you know, their resolve maybe starting to waver a little bit, or whatever might be happening to them when they reach that point. When you are talking to students, what are the sorts of pieces of advice that you give that might be helpful to the folks listening tonight, that would help them, you know, move through that in whatever way they need to in order to get to the other side of it? And ire'ne, I'm looking at you, so I'm going to ask you that first.
So pretty much every workshop I ever do, there's 4 questions that I always ask my participants to answer, because I think it's vitally important when you are debating going to bed, watching Netflix, or putting in an hour at the computer. It's vitally important when you're deciding, you know, how to give yourself the time and space and energy for writing, to know why you're doing it. So I think that's always the central thing for me. Why are you writing? Why this project? What does this project do for me? And not just think about it, articulate it, write it down. And I always tell people, you take those answers, you put it up on your bathroom mirror, you carry it in your bag, you put it in your journal, you stick it up on the wall at your cubicle at work. You take it everywhere with you, so that you always know why. And if you've really answered the questions of why, then you will know why it's important to keep on going.
And someone's asking you to repeat the question that you ask your students. Is it just primarily why, or what are did you give us all 4 questions?
I gave you 3 of them. You have to take a workshop to get the 4th one.
Yeah.
So the first one is, why do I write? The second one is, why this project? And the third one is, what does writing do for me?
And the 4th one is, what are you doing every Wednesday in August?
Exactly. Or just in the future, just take all the workshops I ever do. I'll always make you answer these questions. And I think also that's good too, is to ask yourself at different intervals the same questions, to make sure that you still know why you're doing what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And as you move to a different project, why are you doing that one? Why?
Yeah. Someone mentioned that in the chat too, which I thought was great, was that for them, the middle is the moment where they say, do I really want to be writing this? And sort of, you know, in a different way of asking that question, what does, why this project, right? And for some folks, I wonder if they almost have to write to that point where they realize that it's actually not what's bringing them joy. Charlotte, what about you in terms of what advice you've given us some really great ideas for ways that we can kind of jostle ourselves. Do you have any other thoughts that you give to students when they get to this point where they're just feeling unstuck or stuck and probably a little frustrated?
Well, one of the things I say is that like self-doubt, unfortunately, is part of the landscape that every writer has to negotiate. And so like if you're questioning yourself or questioning the project, hey, you're a writer, like that's part of the process. And so I think that's a really important thing. And I mean, ire'ne just lined out so many amazing things. And the only thing that I would add to that is the idea of love. Like I love my characters, or to Donna's, like, what do I love about only what I know about the world? And it's like this, we kind of, I think as we become people, we like tamp down what makes us unique. And then in the writing, we have to like open up again. And I write a lot about what I feel are marginalized characters. And part of it is I love those characters and no one's going to write them. I feel beholden to them. And there's that great quote from Rilke. It's like, learn to love the questions themselves. And so like to shift our relationship to the dreaded middle is, why do I love this? And why do I, well, there are two more things I want to say there. One is just that those of us who get to work with words, there's a certain amount of privilege in it, and being appreciative of that, I think, is another thing that I would say to students to like, you have this opportunity to explore language or explore story, and, appreciate that. And that has helped me a lot as a writer. Donna has helped me ask me some questions, things about that I appreciate about my own writing. And that has helped kind of help me move when I feel low about my work. And I think that's a great question. I know I had something else brilliant to say, and it was something along the lines, oh, here it is. Everything that we've ever written has helped us get here. So like, a draft that you read and you cringe at it, I'm trying to be like, hey, you're like my teenage self who was trying real hard and I needed you to get here. So writing's really inefficient. It takes a long time. And that those early drafts or those rough drafts, the middle of it, we need to love those because they are part of the path as much as what becomes a final product.
Thank you. Donna, what advice do you give to your students about those moments when they feel stuck or frustrated or just don't feel like they can get past wherever they are?
Well, I think ire'ne's going back, why I'm writing this. I always go back myself and have my students go back and try to remember sort of that first flush of love for a project. What drew you to this project in the first place? What were you hoping to do with this project? You can still do it. You're a little stuck right now. You can still do it. I think trying to remember, and I've done this a lot in the last couple of years, why I'm attached to a project, which honestly, sometimes with memoir, you don't know. I mean, sometimes people have these giant stories to tell, but sometimes there's something that just won't go away, right? And you just, like the story I'm writing now, it just won't go away. I don't really want to do it a lot of times, but it won't go away. But one of the things that I've done recently when I was stuck, and I've talked to a student about this recently, is I go back to advice from my very first writing teacher, and I was writing journalism then. And she said, what you have to do is remember, this is your story. I mean, it's certainly true for memoir, but you can see it's true for all kinds of stories. If you can do that for journalism, this is your story. Only you know the best way to write it. Now, how are you going to do it, right? How are you going to do it? Just pick. Sometimes I'm overwhelmed with choices, and I see students overwhelmed with choices, the stories, even with a memoir, they can go in so many different ways. So you just pick one, and you'll find out sooner or later if you've picked the wrong one. And you can just guide it back, right? It's not that big a deal. And if you haven't sold on proposal, you have enough time to really let the project sort of percolate and develop, right? And you can take those weeks away from it sometimes. I will say, you take those weeks away, it's harder to come back. It is for me, at least. Butt in chair is always a really good thing. Sooner or later, you'll get tired of staring at that computer and start to do something. You know, you won't just sit there for 4 hours, I don't think. And that's kind of heartless, but butt in chair, show up for the process, and try to remember what the passion was.
Yeah.
Kind of like a long-term marriage. What was that initial passion? You know, what drew you to that person?
We'll do some follow-up questions on that later. I'm going to ask this question from the chat box, and I think I'm going to start really ask it to you, Charlotte, because I feel like it's talking about, well, any of you could answer this, but fiction, book length projects. Do you have any tips for multiple voice? Do you have multiple middles? And I think it kind of goes back to that, you know, we can talk about the middle as the physical middle of the book. We can talk about the middle as the middle of the process itself. And then we can also talk about the middle as, you know, a narrative arc, beginning, middle, and end. And in that case, if you are telling something from multiple points of view, are you really trying to shape middles for all of those different points of view?
I'm shaping everybody's middle.
Oh, goodness.
I want to go back just to one thing Donna said. Paula Gunn Allen, she was a friend, and she would say that ideas are like horses and they're all in the pen, and you have to get on one and ride in, and the other one will be there when you get back. You have to find out if that horse was a fit. I think that works pretty well. So I think in terms of multiple voices and multiple characters, this is a time when outlining or just understanding character arc is important. So that's kind of its side writing, in the sense that it's not gonna necessarily, everything you write as you understand multiple characters, it's not gonna be in the final version, but it's the authorial knowledge that you need to have as the writer. And people who've been in a class with me probably get sick of this. I love that the word author lives inside the word authority. So, and you're also thinking about how those different characters are going to intersect towards the end. So I think you have to do some mapping of trajectories. And what is it about each character in the middle where they will face change, and how do those characters drive each other to that change?
Yeah.
So go ride those change horses. I don't know what I'm saying.
Oh my gosh. So then I want to circle back to the ending, and I would love to talk a little bit about how you go. And I guess for those of you who do write, I mean, Donna, Charlotte, do you write middle to end, or do you know what the ending is, I guess is the right way to say that, when you're writing the middle? Or does the ending come upon you and sort of, you know, happen organically? Are you, how does the middle relate to the ending in your work? Charlotte, I'm staring at your head again, sorry.
Okay, I'll be less weird this time. Maybe. I think each project is unique. Again, like I was saying with the one novel, I knew what I wanted the ending to be, but I had to earn that ending. And my first novel, I didn't actually know what the ending was going to be. And it was an editor who said, I think this is what this book is exploring. And so that, and then I also have, you know, written a memoir book, and I did not know what the end was. But it was about in the middle that I was like, oh, this is where this book is headed. And in my first novel, I think it was because I was such a young writer, I didn't understand the book that I was writing. But when that editor said to me, I think this is the ending of this book, it just felt very true. Like, oh, this is what happens in the middle. This is where this book is headed. I was kind of scared of that because it's a book that has violence in it. But for me, I would say it's for each project is different. And I would encourage people to keep like a little feeler out when they're in that middle to like, where is this character or where is the narrator going to be towards the end of this book? And that's that intuitive part of it. And you know, I think you can get ideas when you're in the middle about what's going to happen in the end.
And how would you answer really quick this chat box question, which is not a dumb question? How do we know when we've left the beginning and entered the middle? ire'ne has her hand up. I am calling on you, student.
That was actually something that I left out that I was going to say earlier. And that's that I think, you know, like I was saying in the beginning, you're laying out the land, you're laying out the characters, but after a while, you almost feel it physically. The shift in tone, the shift in pace, a shift in language that confirms you are definitely in the middle now. I mean, it's you know, when you think of the way that most, you know, great movies are laid out. There's a certain place in every movie you can almost, after a while, you can say there, right there, that scene, that moment. That's where we shifted from introduction and beginning to the middle. And there's a whole way that it turns. What I also wanted to do though, was because Charlotte decided to restrain herself on being weird, I wanted to kind of jump off the edge of the cliff here for a moment, because I think part of what we're talking about when we have writers that are dealing with multiple voices, multiple middles, multiple narratives, or any kind of story that is not the more accepted linear chronological story. What happens is we have there are a couple things that happen there. One of them, and this is the part where I'm jumping off, has to do with how we as individuals understand what time is. If we think of time as being this very simple, linear, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, then that is going to shape the way we think of story. And that's going to shape the way that we think of narrative. And that's going to shape the way what our project looks like. If you understand time differently, if you have no respect for what is the past and what is the future and what is the present, if you have the sense that all of these things are always interacting with each other and changing each other and giving energy this way and that way, then that's going to shape your story and that's going to shape the way you write your project. And so it might make it really difficult if you have this understanding of time and story that other people don't. And so you go to a group and you say, here, this is my story. And everyone goes, I have no idea what this is. And it's not that your story is incorrect. It's not that your narrative is incorrect. It's not that your plotting or your whatever else is wrong. It's that it's different. And so that's just part of what we're working with, is that a lot of the times, any kind of different understanding, a different understanding of time, a different understanding of space, a different understanding of relationship between people or communities or land, anything is going to change the way that you think a story should be built. And you're going to feel that the most in the middle, because then you have to not just put it out there, you have to actually show what that is. And that's the hard part there.
So how do you do that?
Very slowly and carefully. And you have to understand what your own understanding of it is. So that's why I like what Charlotte was saying about you write to yourself about the project, because in a sort of way, I love this idea of the characters writing themselves 20 years after the end of the book, because in a way, that's a way of looking at what the understanding is of time and of character development. We think so much of ourselves as the past that we've lived, and not that we are constantly becoming the future of who we will be. We think of, what's one of the things that I find fascinating about memoir is that so often past generations end up being worked into the story, because that has shaped us as much as whatever is coming in the future. We don't think of the future shaping us, but it is, because we're thinking of, what are we doing now? How is that affecting the future? How are the stories that we're writing now going to affect the future? How have we been shaped by the literature that we've read, and how are we being constantly shaped by the new literature that's coming up? So it's the acceptance of knowing that we are not fixed points in time, and our projects are not fixed points in time either. Mm-hmm. There you go, Charlotte. I did it for us.
You guys don't have the same definition of weird that I have. I don't think anything that you have said has been weird. I think it's been really so interesting and so true that, you know, we sort of started this off talking about the dreaded middle, and I stand by the topic, but I love the way that we've kind of challenged ourselves about the way we even think about beginning, middle, end, and how projects, the time it takes for projects to evolve, and what we write first and what we write later, and the time that a project needs to breathe, and all of the stuff that you guys have said, again, much more eloquently than I'm saying at this moment. I want to just give some maybe last thoughts from each of you. I would love for you each to give a last thought about, you know, someone in the chat asked, how long does a book have to be? How do you figure out how long a project is going to be? And so I think, you know, as we talk about the middle, but we've touched on endings. And I guess my question for you is, when do you know you're done? It's a terrible question, but I'm going to ask it. And I'm going to ask it of Donna Johnson first.
When do you know you're done? Well, I'm done for tonight. No, I think, so for my first book, I had a beginning and I knew where I was writing to. And when I got there, my idea of where I was writing to still made sense. I don't think I really was able, because I didn't understand, like Charlotte, I didn't really understand the book I was writing. I wasn't able to take that as deep as I could, but it still worked. I think now, with a couple of pieces of reporting still up in the air for me, it's gonna have to arrive organically. And so I think I would tell students, you know, you're at the end when you've drawn the threads of the story maybe together and shifted, and you're looking at the story then from a new perspective. You've had a shift in perspective. Memoir, you know, editors are always asking for epiphanies, and there's nothing worse than a drummed up epiphany. You know, you can smell it. But writers often end up in a deeper place, in another space than where they started, and they get there through the writing of the book. So I think for me, I would look at, and for students, I would look at when you get to that place where there's a kind of settling of all that you've been writing. There's a kind of settling. And I think that's when you know you're there. And then you come back 2 weeks later, or maybe a month later, or 2 months later after you've finished it, and put it aside. And if that still feels like the settled place, if the shift has happened and you're in a new, different place than where you started in terms of how you're looking at the past, then you're at the end.
What does a drummed up epiphany smell like?
I don't really want to go there because there's book endings are coming to mind, and I think that's uncharitable. And,
oh, you were going to give us an example.
Right.
I meant like lavender, or.
It does not smell like lavender. It smells like 3-day-old fish, I think, with lavender layered on top. You know what I mean? It's
that's just awful.
It is awful.
Yeah, I'm not even going to tell that story. Charlotte, when do you know when you're done?
Well, I mean, I echo everything that Donna just said, and I feel like I know that my work is done. This is going to sound so cheesy. When I feel like my soul has grown, like I'm a different person at the end, and hopefully a better person, because I think it's through writing that I have become a more empathetic, less impulsive human being. And I lean towards generosity, as Judith Barrington says. But also there's the craft stuff. Like, I'm going to try this new craft thing out and see if I can do it. And if I feel like I have gotten closer to gaining some creativity and innovation with it, then okay, that's pretty exciting too. Like that novel that I drafted last summer, I'm trying to write a really funny book. And Drew, my partner, he's like, I don't know if you can write a really funny book. You might write a serious book with funny moments. And now I'm like, I'm going to show you, but I think he's right. The only other thing is like, sometimes I need other people to help me feel like recognize if there are areas that I haven't looked at, and that I really feel like the unsung part of writing is collaboration. And that's another thing, when you're stuck, to talk to other people. Is we really need communities to help us sustain our faith in things, to find our joy, and to help us like, hey, can you read this? And like, you know, I feel like you kind of didn't really talk about this thing, or this character's actions didn't feel earned, and that we need many eyes on it. And that the editor who took my first book, he always said things like, I'm giving you a suggestion, but only take if it resonates with your aesthetic vision. And I didn't know what that meant, because I'm from the woods, but I looked it up and now I know. But I think that's true. Like the feedback that helps you get the work stronger, that's one of the ways I know. I think I'm moving toward doneness.
Sharing it with others. Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation, right? ire'ne, what about you?
I was thinking earlier, I think Donna mentioned one of the first pieces of writing advice that she ever got. And this question made me think of one of the first pieces of, it was the very first writing workshop I ever took. And the instructor said something about that the goal when you're writing whatever kind of piece it is to reach the place where, if you were to imagine a pair of lungs, imagine the lungs fully expanded, where every bronchial whatever is full of air, not to the point of pain, not where it hurts, but not where any part of it isn't full of the air that it's capable of holding. So that's the feeling you want. You want the lungs to feel fully expanded, not too full, but every part of it. And I think that is, after a while, the feeling you get, where you're like, okay, I've told all the parts of the story that need to be told. I haven't neglected anything, but there's nothing extra. Nothing extra, but nothing left out. And that balance, that's where you know a thing is done.
And then, as Beverly in the chat has said, you put a literary fork in it and it's done. Wow, guys, I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation, and really at a moment's notice, it feels like, when you said yes to this, and equally just the time that you've taken in the last week, and the time that you're going to take in August to put together classes and share classes with so many lucky writers. I really am serious when I say I may take all of your classes. I get to do that as the executive director. I'll audit you, but thank you so much. And I want to encourage everybody to, find, obviously, as many of the books and writing projects and other things that online or in your virtual bookstores that you can from our 3 panelists. But also, when you're doing that, be sure to check out our website as well. And Sam's throwing up the link for the summer writing retreat, because it really is going to be a special month. And I know that you will not regret it if you spend 27 days. That's what it's going to be, 27 days with us in August. So thank you to the 3 of you for being here and doing this. And yeah, that's all she wrote.
Thank you, Becka.
And thank you, Sam, for hanging out and behind the scenes and orchestrating it all. There she is. Where's Chester, Sam? Is he around?
I kicked him out of the room.
Sam's cat. Chester's our unofficial mascot here at the Writers League of Texas, but he's been banned from their room. All right. Well, folks, you guys are welcome to drop off, anyone and everyone. And I know that if anyone has any last questions or anything in the writing or in the chat box that they want to share, we're happy to answer them. But until next time, Chester, Joe says, that's sweet. But otherwise, I'm sure I'll talk to all of you soon. Thank you.